From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Julie Fine, in for Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Donald Trump outraises President Biden by more than $50 million in May, according to new filings coming just 6 days before the first presidential debate. We'll have more with Jenn Jackson, political science professor at Syracuse University.
The Supreme Court upholds a federal ban on domestic abusers owning guns. But with a week left in its term, the justices have yet to rule on whether Trump is immune from prosecution in the case Jack Smith brought against him here in Washington.
Meanwhile, Trump's defense team arguing that Smith was illegally appointed in a hearing in the Florida Documents case today. We'll discuss it with Dave Aronberg, state attorney for Palm Beach County.
So we have a lot to talk about this evening, Julie, as we close out the week here and wait for a new one, which is going to bring some pretty big Supreme Court decisions and, of course, the first presidential debate. But we begin this evening with Biden lagging behind Trump in fundraising for the second month in a row. New FEC filings show in May, Biden and the Democratic Party pulled in $85 million. That's an amount dwarfed by Donald Trump and the RNC, who posted a massive $141 million haul, much of that raised in the aftermath of his criminal conviction. Joining us now with more is Bloomberg's Gregory Korte. So, Gregory, up until 2 months ago, it was always Biden outraising Trump. It was Biden with this massive cash cushion. Now that cushion's getting a lot smaller, and Trump is out ahead. How many months does it take before we establish a pattern here?
Well, the clear disruption of the pattern, at least in May, was this verdict in the New York criminal case against Donald Trump, which led to this fundraising bonanza. In the 48 hours after that verdict, Trump and the RNC raised $50 million, a little bit more, actually. So if you subtract that out, they're actually pretty even for the month of May. It's really that difference, that bump that he got, especially small dollar donors, immediately after the verdict. And the concern for the Biden campaign is going to have to be looking forward into July when we get the sentencing in that case. It could lead to another short-term bump in Trump's fundraising. We were talking just, a few months ago about how Trump seemed to have really sort of gotten as much as he could out of the small dollar donors, but he's shown that they are resilient. And as this election campaign heats up and the rhetoric on both sides, you have to think that both sides are really going to go back to those donors again and again to try to get every last dollar out of them.
You're talking about the sentencing, and then you have the RNC convention on the heels of that. But let's talk about next week for Democrats. That is the anniversary of Dobbs. I'm already seeing candidates talking about events, doing some fundraising surrounding that. Do you expect that to be a haul for President Biden?
I certainly expect them to be fundraising on that. But what I've perceived is that the Dobbs decision and the end of the Roe versus Wade era that enshrined abortion rights in our Constitution really helped Democrats at the ballot box, but not as much in fundraising, as opposed to Trump, where it's helped with fundraising and it remains to be seen in the ballot box. This is a general election. Certainly during the primary phase, you had a sort of a different dynamic. We'll have to see. I have been impressed by the staying power that abortion ruling has had with Democratic voters. They didn't just show up in 2022. They've continued to show up in special elections and off-year elections, every election since then. So you have to think it's going to be a powerful motivator for them to get to the polls in November.
So get to the polls may be a powerful motivator for them to give campaigns money. The campaign's raking all the money in, though, is just one part of the equation. Then you got to spend it. Gregory, given the kind of hauls that we saw last month, how should we expect the campaign behavior to change as we move in the summer and toward the fall?
Yeah, we're still sort of in this hot summer where people are going off on vacations, the kids are out of school, people aren't necessarily paying a whole lot of attention. And so Joe Biden's campaign is on the air right now. Donald Trump hasn't cut a new ad since February. So we're going to start looking towards Labor Day, certainly after the conventions, and then Labor Day, people really start to tune in. That's where we're going to see a lot of the ads. For now, Joe Biden is spending a lot of his money on grassroots, on opening field offices. He announced this week that he has 1,000 field staff out in battleground states in about 200 offices around the country. Trump is spending a lot of his money, unfortunately for him, on legal bills right now. So At some point, they're going to transition to TV. The super PACs are going to come in and buy a lot of that. But it's these hard dollars that the campaigns raise that go the furthest once we start buying ads in the fall.
Is this an advantage for President Biden that the Democratic convention is right around Labor Day? And following that, we've seen candidates get a bump in polling and get a bump in money.
Traditionally, the incumbent party in the White House gets to go last. They want to go last, right? Because exactly that. Each campaign has a little bit of a bump coming out of the conventions. It usually dissipates after a while, but you want to get that bump later than the other guy. And so, yeah, having the Democratic convention go as late as it's going could advantage Joe Biden. It tripped him up a little bit in Ohio. The convention is actually too late to get on the ballot in Ohio. They're going to have the roll call of the states earlier than the convention. Not ideal, but it sort of underscores that conventions really aren't about nominating anymore. They're more about messaging.
Bloomberg's Gregory Korte, thank you so much for being with us. And the Supreme Court ruled 8-1 to uphold a federal law barring firearm possession by those with domestic violence restraining orders against them. Justice Clarence Thomas, the sole dissenting vote. Earlier today, Robert McWhirter, criminal defense attorney, had this to say about the case.
This case really was the poster child for gun regulation. This is a person, Mr. Remy, who should never have a firearm in this context, and this statute was perfectly appropriate.
Still to come for the High Court are rulings related to charges against the January 6 rioters and the case of presidential immunity. We're joined now by Bloomberg's Megan Scully. Thanks so much for being with us, Megan.
Thanks for coming.
I want to start with this. You know, you have this ruling today, but last week you saw the Supreme Court and their actions on bump stocks. Then you saw Congress trying to reverse that. I mean, what happens from here on this issue?
It's going to be really interesting to watch. So today's ruling was a victory, albeit a tempered one for those who support gun regulations, in that it does allow, it could pave the way to uphold further gun restrictions down the road. The issue, though, is particularly when you look at the details of the decisions, particularly Chief Justice John Roberts talking about how this is limited and tailored and temporary, that banning these weapons from domestic abusers or alleged domestic abusers are a temporary measure, and this is not meant to be a permanent, widespread, change in gun law. So we're going to see kind of maybe some efforts here to move ahead on some gun regulation. But as you said, after the bump stock ruling last week, Congress failed to move forward with that. Senate Republicans balked at efforts to enshrine in law a ban on bump stocks. And so they are once again stuck in terms of legislating on this issue.
And so much falls to the judicial branch, including a number of decisions that the court has yet to make with a week left in its term. Some of those pertaining to cases around January 6th or Donald Trump, who many in Congress have called for Justice Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from, based off of the association of his wife, Ginny Thomas, Alito, in the case of the insurrection flags that were hanging outside his homes. But once the term is over, does that effort on the part of Congress to push for that kind of change on the court just kind of end with the term?
It's not so much that it ends with the term.
Or maybe it never began in the first place.
Right. As with the gun legislation, it didn't get off the ground. Particularly in a divided Congress, it's going to be very hard to get anything through. We have a 6-3 Supreme Court, in favor of conservatives. And, Republicans in the House aren't going to want to do anything that limits Clarence Thomas or so it's going to hinge on the outcome of the November election, who controls each chamber and who's in the White House, and whether there's still a will to carry this forward. Next year is going to be a busy agenda, no matter who is in there, with tax overhaul and debt ceiling and lots of other things already on tap.
Let's just get through this election first, and then we can think about all the joys 2025 are going to bring. Bloomberg's Megan Scully, thank you so much for joining us. Now, still ahead, Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg will join us for this conversation as we take a closer look at the Supreme Court's ruling on guns today and those cases they have yet to decide before the end of the term. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
for Judge Cannon's agreeing to give massive hearings to what are throwaway issues from the defense. If it wasn't for the judge delaying this case would have already been tried, as would the other. So really, I think this is just all on the judge.
That was criminal defense lawyer Robert McWhorter on the early edition of Balance of Power today, reacting to a multi-day hearing that began today on the legality of the appointment of Jack Smith to prosecute Trump in the classified documents case in Florida. The judge, Trump appointee Aileen Cannon, has faced criticism for slow-walking the proceedings. We're joined now for more by State Attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Aronberg. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Dave, when we consider this question, whether or not Jack Smith was legally appointed, is there any reading of the law that would suggest he was not appointed in accordance with it?
No, Kaylee, and previous courts have said over and over again that this is all legit. I don't understand why Judge Cannon insists on reinventing the wheel, but this is feeding into Trump's delay tactics. And no matter what she does in this case, if she decides to do away with the independent counsel, the special counsel law, and throw out Jack Smith's appointment, it will be appealed, and I think it will be reversed, and she can get thrown off this case. Just keep in mind, the law empowers the attorney general to make such appointments. So the fact is, she is not only indulging Trump in this request to have a hearing on this, she's allowing outsiders who are not even part of the case to make an oral argument on both sides of this issue. This is a big reason why this case is going nowhere fast, and it's on the shoulders of Judge Cannon.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. There was a report in the New York Times that several judges have actually said they've suggested she shouldn't even be on the case, and obviously she still is. Your reaction to that report?
Yeah, I was surprised that judges are talking. That's rare. Judges usually stay silent and they protect each other, but they must be so outraged that Judge Cannon decided to eschew their advice. And for a rookie judge who was given advice not just from a more senior judge, but from the chief judge to say, no, I got this, that takes a lot of chutzpah. That's by the way, a Latin term we use in the law. And it is something that makes you just shake your head and say, hey, what is going on here? And I think what's going on here is that Judge Cannon was repudiated and humiliated last year when she got involved in this case in pushing this special master to delay the investigation of Donald Trump. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals reversed her and admonished her. And I think this case now is about a chance of redemption to try to show that, no, she is a federal judge who can handle a big case. I don't think she wanted to follow the 11th Circuit's repudiation of her with resigning from this case, sending it to someone else. I think she wants to prove herself. But so far, she has been flubbing the case left and right.
Well, David, did you not just suggest that there's a chance she could potentially be thrown off this case on appeal over this Jack Smith issue?
If she makes a final order declaring that the special counsel statute is unconstitutional and getting rid of Jack Smith, yeah, that will be appealed, certainly. And I think that will get a reverse and possibly thrown off the case. A lot of the rulings she's made so far have not been final orders. And so that puts Jack Smith in what I call dilatory purgatory, where he can't appeal what is not a final order. So he has to, go along with this until he gets something final on paper to take to the 11th Circuit. So when Judge Cannon, for example, put forth these jury instructions that were wrong, that were improper, and that favored Donald Trump, Jack Smith complained about it, but he couldn't appeal it because it wasn't a final order. So that's the thing that she's been doing. She's been doing things to benefit Trump, but hasn't done enough to take it to the 11th Circuit. So that's why Jack Smith's stuck in this state of purgatory.
And he's also stuck in the state. Do you think that he should have tried this case here?
Well, as a Florida man myself, I like that he did it in Florida. It gives me more chance to talk about it. But also, I think that if he had gone to D.C., Trump would have legitimately expressed a lot of these venue arguments. He would have filed pleadings saying that the venue is improper. And I think he would have had a point. The obstruction here really took place at Mar-a-Lago, not in Washington, D.C. It wasn't while he was president. The unlawful retention of the documents and the obstruction really took place in South Florida at Mar-a-Lago. That's why Jack Smith filed it down here. Also, he didn't want to look like he was trying to manipulate the system. He's about fair play, and that's why he filed it down here. Now, what he didn't expect was for Judge Cannon to get the case and then for this case to be delayed over and over again. And the case that is the strongest against Donald Trump, this Mar-a-Lago documents case, is ironically the least likely to go to trial anytime soon.
Well, the case that Jack Smith brought against him here in Washington isn't likely to go to trial without a decision from the Supreme Court on presidential immunity. That we're still waiting for. We did, though, get a decision from the court today in a gun case, and I spoke about it with Elizabeth Weider, a Constitutional Accountability Center president, earlier on. Take a listen to what she told me.
The case was 8-1. Only Justice Thomas dissented. And that really shows I think the soundness of the constitutional analysis finding this regulation of domestic abusers to be constitutional, and also just the common sense behind it.
So, Dave, she, of course, alluded there to the idea that the court today upheld a federal ban on those who have been accused of domestic violence, have restraining orders out against them from owning a gun. But this is the same court that just last week shot down the federal ban on bump stocks. How do you reconcile those two different rulings?
This case was just a bridge too far. I mean, when Justice Alito is going along with the majority, you know that if you're the one vote on the opposite side, that you're crazy, because Justice Thomas took an absolutist position saying that the Second Amendment means no restrictions whatsoever, even if you're a criminal, even if you are barred because you have committed domestic violence, you're under a restraining order, still have at your guns. That is a position that's so far out of the mainstream that even Justice Alito couldn't stomach it. So I think here it was about common sense. And in fact, that was a phrase that I believe was used by Chief Justice Roberts. And in this case, 8-1, this was a no-brainer. The bump stock one was tougher because Congress could have acted and it didn't act. I disagreed with the court's decision, but it was a lot closer call than this one, where we've always had common sense gun restrictions when it comes to criminals and other people who violate the law. So Clarence Thomas is the outlier here, not the 8 justices in the majority.
And also yet to be decided by the Supreme Court is the case regarding presidential immunity, which could come next week, and it actually could come on the same day the candidates debate.
Well, that's where the Supreme Court certainly seems to be putting its thumb on the scale here, because this case went to the Supreme Court in December. Remember, Jack Smith said, please come on in now. Let's not delay matters. And the Supreme Court said, no. Just go through the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals first. Well, they did. And the Circuit Court of Appeals came out with a powerful and thorough ruling. And the U.S. Supreme Court threw it in the trash and said, now we're going to get involved and we're going to wait until the last day of our calendar to hear the case and then rule on it. So Trump wins by losing. Even if the Supreme Court says it's game on in D.C., it's a lot tougher now for that case to go. I think the Supreme Court is going to reject absolute immunity, but it's still going to send it back to Judge Chutkan to do some fact-finding, to find out whether Trump did what he did in his scope of authority as president. And so it will probably just mean that this case won't be heard before the election. The one good thing about it, though, is if this happens and it goes back to Judge Chutkan, she'll have an evidentiary hearing and the public will see what Trump did before, during, and after January 6th. So it's sort of like a mini trial.
Dave Aronberg, Palm Beach County State Attorney, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, independence of the Federal Reserve is emerging as a 2024 campaign issue. We'll look at the effect a possible Trump re-election could have on the central bank. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I can spend a long time talking to you about economies that have been brought to their knees when the independence of the central bank has been compromised. That's one of the main reasons why this president takes the stance that he does and follows it assiduously.
That was Jared Bernstein, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, back in April here on Balance of Power, emphasizing the importance of having a politically independent central bank. But Fed independence could be at stake in this 2024 election cycle. Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Enda Curran. So obviously the Biden administration, as we just heard from Jared there, has made a real point about trying to ensure the Fed's independence. Donald Trump has not necessarily made the same such promises. But what options would Trump really have to influence the Fed if he were to be elected?
Yes, we don't yet have an official kind of stance from the Trump campaign, but certainly this is a focus for investors for a couple of reasons. First of all, we know that there has been tension in the past between former President Donald Trump and current Fed Chair Jerome Powell. His chairmanship will be up for reappointment during the next presidency, so question marks over would former President Trump reappoint him, what would happen to chairmanship, and who else would President Trump appoint to Fed roles that would come up in his term. So there are questions over the kind of personnel who will be appointed. And then there's questions over what kind of tone would the administration, a Trump administration, take towards the Fed. Would it be pressuring the Fed to bring down interest rates? Would they be interfering in a way that previous presidents haven't? So lots of questions there over just how exactly a Trump administration would treat the Fed compared to how the Biden administration does.
Tone or not, no matter how any president acts, it's very difficult to change how the central bank operates.
It is. They have protection through the law. They have the protection through Congress. A president can't just come in overnight and wave a wand in terms of turn the Fed upside down. But there is a lot at stake. You know, the Fed does have, or the president has a lot of say over what personalities get picked, for example, providing Congress wave them through. The president could take a particular stance on monetary policy, jawbone on interest rates in a way that past presidents haven't. So there is certainly a lot that the president could change if they wanted to. And I think that's why investors are keeping a close eye on this subplot. As I say, we don't have an official stance yet, but people are asking questions about what might happen if there was to be a change of administration.
And it's an excellent point, Enda, that a lot of this requires Congress, too. So it's not just about whether or not Donald Trump wins, but whether Republicans gain control of the Senate because they have confirmation power.
A lot of focus on what does happen with the Senate and the House. Is it divided? Is it a sweep for the Republicans, etc.? That will obviously set the tone. And then what kind of personalities get picked if President Trump does get re-elected. Lots of question marks around how the Fed would be shaped under the next term. But ultimately, though, there's a lot at stake for the Fed, too. They pride themselves on independence. Yeah. It's one of their big positions globally. So a lot of scrutiny on the politics, I think, in the next term.
All right. Bloomberg's Enda Curran, thank you so much. Coming up, we'll have a preview of the presidential debate next week and the potential impact it could have on undecided voters. Jenn Jackson, political science professor at Syracuse University, will join us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Voters think about politics 4 minutes a week. And in that time, they really want to know what's in it for them. People are now starting to confront this choice they have in 148 days. They don't want this choice. 80% of Americans didn't think it was going to be Trump versus Biden, didn't want it. But this is now the choice they have.
That was Jim Messina, former campaign manager for Barack Obama, earlier this month on Balance of Power, talking about how much brain space voters are devoting to the presidential election this far in advance. Joining us now to discuss the type of voters next week's debate may impact is Jenn Jackson, political science professor of the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with, we are smack in the beginning of the summer. So how tuned in are people, and what type of person do you think will be watching this debate?
Yeah, these are important questions. You know, I focus mainly on young Black Americans and young diverse Americans. And what we saw just now is the truth. A lot of young people are having a hard time tuning into politics because they can't figure out where to find accurate information that actually reflects what's happening in the world. So many young people are tuning out. And where they are now is they're concerned about choosing, for what people say, is the lesser of two evils. They want a better choice in November. And many of them are saying that if they aren't going to have a better choice, then they're just going to stay home.
And yet these are the choices they have. So it just raises the question of how those choices are able to convince them to actually show out and vote. What issues could drive that, could force them to the polls in November, or at least encourage them in that direction?
Absolutely. You know, for many people, we are still thinking about Roe v. Wade and the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned. Many young people who are thinking about casting their ballots, who some of them for the first time, are concerned about what this means for their long-term longevity and their health. So, you know, I do a lot of work with what's called the Gen Forward Survey. It's housed at the University of Chicago, and it's a nationally representative survey with over samples of young Black Americans, Latinos, and also Asian and Pacific Islanders. And for many of them, they're concerned not only about issues of women's rights and reproductive justice, but also the economy. When we asked in 2020 what the biggest concerns were, they said abolition, they said police, they said the killings of Black Americans, but now they're thinking about pocketbook issues. Who's going to ensure that they have jobs? Who's going to ensure that they have access to education? And if these two candidates, who are in the lead, in fact, can't speak to that very quickly, then they're going to see a lot of young people disinterested and disaffected.
But the question, I think, coming with this debate is how do you even get young people to watch, especially to watch right now? How do the candidates engage them this early?
So what the truth about the matter is that media still functions very much the same way as always has functioned. Traditional news media, we're used to seeing, you know, the penny press and television news. But for many of these new voters, they're getting their news on Twitter and they're getting their news on TikTok and Instagram, but it's still the same news. It's just snippets of what people are saying on C-SPAN, right? So they may not tune in live to the debate, but they will absolutely see snippets and excerpts from people who are often translating that information for younger audiences. So for, you know, our lead candidates, and specifically I'm thinking about Biden, because a lot of young folks at the margins are hoping that he will speak to issues that they are concerned about. They're thinking about Gaza. They're thinking about why their money is going to fund what many are calling a genocide in the West Bank. He has to speak to those things, and whether or not they tune in that day, they will see excerpts, they will see clips, and he doesn't want to be made into a meme.
You said something that I found very interesting. You said a lot of people see snippets. Sometimes when people do see snippets, though, and not the whole debate or not the whole answer, they don't fully get the entire context of what was said. How do the candidates make sure the voters find that out?
That is absolutely right. And that's why political messaging right now is so important. This is why when these candidates are running for office and they're making their proclamations about what's important to them, they have to get right to the point. We all know, we've all been, exposed to the politicking for some time. And we know that there's a lot of kind of political language and jargon that's a part of this process. And that's precisely what is turning off young voters. They don't feel like anyone's being honest about the state of the world. And that's what these candidates are going to have to do. So no more of the kind of walking around the answer to the question. They have to get right to it.
Well, especially when there's a mute button involved, and once their time's up, their mic's getting cut off, at least theoretically. That's part of the rules we have to consider in this debate in particular, as well as the fact that there will be no live audience. This is something I spoke with Barbara Perry, a presidential studies professor at the University of Virginia, about earlier today. This is what she told me.
I, for one, Kaylee, will be pleased not to have the booing and the shouting and the clapping. I find that distracting. But it might be a little bit like during the pandemic, watching the U.S. Open tennis match or watching the Masters without anybody there spectating and cheering. And so the silence may be deafening in that sense.
I thought it was interesting there, Professor, that she was kind of describing the debate in the same terms as spectator sports and what silence can do in that scenario. The lack of a live audience when so many of us are used to getting the cues of the laugh tracks on sitcoms or what have you. How do you see that playing into the way in which this debate performance will be received on both these candidates' parts?
What's interesting is that, that's a generational concern, right? Young people overwhelmingly are not sitcom folks. Like, these are young people who aren't even watching television. My students don't have televisions in their dorm rooms. They're watching YouTube. They're watching TikTok. They're watching their favorite shows on social media. There are no laugh tracks. There are no cues. So it's actually, for a lot of the folks that I study and the folks that I work with directly, it'll be more natural for what they're expecting. But what I hear, right, is that for older voters who are used to a certain type of politics, a certain status quo at these debates, they may feel alienated by this format. And I think that's something that our candidates will have to consider as well.
One thing the candidates, I think, do have to consider is they're really trying to speak, in many cases, to an independent voter. There are a lot of people that are decided no matter what. That fraction in the middle is very small. What do they need to do to appeal to them?
It's really important that we understand that any moment, that kind of group of independents, that kind of median voter can shift. And what we're seeing is, at least in the data, is that for a lot of young people who are thinking about who to vote for in November, they're concerned that the parties are a little too extreme. And this is on both sides. There are a lot of young folks who say that Democrats are far too liberal and that conservatives are far too conservative. But I think that what we actually see here is that for Republicans in the data is actually more young people who say that Republicans are too far. So I think to get those independents, to get those median voters, they'll have to appeal to those conservative voters who are teetering, those conservative voters who are concerned that their party is no longer leaning toward their values and is starting to move to a place that feels like the fringe. And that's usually how it works. It's a pendulum-like effect every election, depending on where those independents will go. And this year, based on our polling, it looks like it might actually be a pendulum swinging toward the conservative side. And that might be where we can find some of those voters.
Well, it's also interesting to consider, Professor, as in our final moment with you, that we've already established that a lot of young people, especially, or people of color, don't particularly like these candidates. They don't like the choices they have at the top of the ballot. Could they, though, be driven to go out and vote for everybody else that's on it, for Senate, for the House, for their own state races? How should we consider that factor, and what kind of coattail effects that Biden and Trump may be able to rely on?
I think this is such an important question. Not only are young voters concerned about these kind of leading candidates, they're also concerned about Cornel West and Kennedy. They don't want any of the folks that are potentially in the running. And what they have said, though, is that they are concerned about local issues. They are concerned about who's going to affect their day-to-day lives. And they are educating themselves through local meetings and social movement work and ways to address concerns in their communities, especially around schooling and housing, right? So I think that there may be down ballot effects in the long term, and we may see them shuffle out for the parties. But when it comes to local politics, I think that we'll actually see a resurgence of interest, especially for young people who are thinking about actually entering politics themselves.
All right, Professor, it was great to have you on the program. Jenn Jackson, political science professor of the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. Thank you so much for your time. Coming up, the Supreme Court weighs in on guns, upholding a federal law preventing those with domestic violence restraining orders from possessing a firearm. They still have a lot more consequential cases to decide in the next week, though, and we'll walk through the political implications with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Getting increasingly difficult for the American people to separate politics from justice. And that is deeply unfortunate, because it's really important for the judiciary to have the faith and trust from the people that there will be impartial justice, that there will be equal justice under the law for all.
That was Elizabeth Wydra, Constitutional Accountability Center president, earlier today on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, commenting on the struggle of separating courts from politics. Joining us now with more, our political panel, Rick Davis of Stonecourt Capital and Jeanne Zaino, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Great to have you both here on this Friday, a Friday in which we did get a handful of Supreme Court opinions. Jeanne, one of them weighing in on what is a hot-button cultural issue, gun rights, the Second Amendment. They upheld a ban on those who have domestic violence restraining orders from owning a firearm. But within the next week, they're also going to have to decide a case pertaining to abortion. Multiple cases that could impact the legal trajectory of Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee. Are we in a world in which the courts could be just as influential on deciding who wins elections as the American people?
Yes, it's a very scary time for small d Democrats. The idea that people are so disenchanted with the legal system and so concerned about the political influence from the judiciary is a problem for all of us, Republicans and Democrats alike. And, you know, there is no escaping it. This term, the court took some real hot button issues, some of which they took late. And depending on how they come out, particularly on the abortion and the Donald Trump immunity case, you're going to have very strong opinions, obviously, on both sides, just like the Second Amendment case last week. This one, I think, is a little bit of an exception today because it was, you know, an 8-1 decision, and it was based on a common sense reading of the law, which is that if you are charged with or you have found to have a restraining order in domestic violence cases, you should not be allowed to carry a gun. I think that's something vast majorities of Americans support.
Jeanne, that, of course, that was an 8-1 vote. So you saw that. But again, as you just pointed out, much different than the ruling we saw regarding bump stocks. All of this, again, coming at the end of the term. Not surprising. We see that very often. But again, could be very influential in the next few months of politics.
Absolutely right. And, you know, I think that on both sides, Democrats and Republicans are guilty of this. You know, I have not been a fan of the trying of the former president in many of these cases. When you politicize a justice system in a democracy, people become suspicious of it. And that's what we have today. The loss of the legitimacy for a variety of reasons surrounding the judiciary matters because we depend on them to protect our very important liberties and rights. And we can't trust them to do that if we feel like they are acting politically. So it's a problem all the way around.
And of course, confidence in the court we have seen in polling has gone down in the last 2 years since the Dobbs ruling, in which they overturned Roe v. Wade. Rick, that anniversary comes up on Monday. And in the very same week of that anniversary, they will have to issue another ruling that pertains to abortion rights. Does the court guarantee that Republicans cannot escape the abortion issue in this election cycle, just as was the case in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, the court always has a way of getting their nose into politics, and it isn't a political decision by them per se, but that plays into the political cycles, right? I mean, obviously, Dobbs coming right before a midterm election obviously had a very big impact on that midterm election outcome. So I think that this court is basically just pursuing their agenda. And a lot of the agenda these days are these more cultural hot-button issues that tend to make its way into the court. And I think today's a good example that regardless of which side you were on, you were partly happy with the court outcome. And then a week ago, as you said, you were unhappy, regardless of which side you were on, with the bump stock ruling. That was overturning a Donald Trump law. Mm-hmm. So I think it goes both ways. I would actually say the underlying aspect of what's really hurting the court these days is the ethics issues. And I think that is the kind of thing, ultimately, that can undermine the court, because that isn't a decision they're making. It's their conduct. And I think that has a bigger impact on voters than any single decision.
Rick, you just talked about abortion issue in the midterm elections, and a lot of people are talking about how this will play out in the presidential election. Midterms, presidential, obviously very different things with the top of the ticket. I mean, how much of an issue do you think it will become, and does it really show who is or who isn't a one-issue voter?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to separate abortion out of the political dynamic, and it does ebb and flow, right? When it's not in the news, abortion tends to be less of a political issue. And then when you have a big event like this, with a decision by the Supreme Court, it comes back to the top. I would say the big difference is turnout. During the midterm elections, you have a much lower turnout, which means highly committed voters like abortion voters who put that at the top of their their list of things they care most about, tend to have a bigger impact than if it was otherwise a big turnout election, and then that kind of washes out into the electorate. So I think this year, if I'm a Democrat, I'm not looking at abortion to be that significantly big an impact because it's just so many other people, turning out for different reasons.
And coming up, Donald Trump has received a major boost from his billionaire supporters. The former president has raised more money than President Biden for the second straight month. We'll be back with our political panel to break down those numbers. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
For these presidential candidates and the incumbent president, they want to have clean catches, they want to hit home runs, maybe even a grand slam, no bobbles, no errors. And because that is what people remember, and it often has an impact on who wins or who loses the election.
That was Barbara Perry, presidential studies professor at the University of Virginia, earlier today on the importance of presidential debates for the candidates. Our closers, Rick and Jeanne, back with us. Okay, closer Rick, let's talk a little. We're going to go to closer Jeanne. My apologies. We're back with closer Rick. Okay, Rick, when you look at the debate next week, let's talk a little bit about it. I mean, we keep talking about where we are in the season. It's so early. Are people even going to be watching this?
Yeah, this is a big question mark. We've never had a presidential debate in the summer before, the conventions. Normally, they actually have to be officially the nominees to debate each other. So this is untreaded ground. And my own personal feeling is I don't like seeing anything happen in the summer before an election because people have other interests. I mean, going to the beach, doing things with their families. It's not high political season. And so it'll really be interesting because the other issue here is that it's not going to be rebroadcast across all the different networks. It's going to be CNN. And can CNN garner 80 million people in one night? It would be historic for them, but there's no evidence that they can actually pull that off.
I will state for the record, you could also watch it on Bloomberg TV. We will be broadcasting CNN's debate on radio as well, and Rick will be here through our special coverage next Thursday. But to Rick's point about activity in the summer, Jeanne, debate one thing. What about spending money on ads as another? Considering we just got the May fundraising numbers, we know that Joe Biden and the DNC brought in $85 million, Trump and the RNC $141 million. It's a lot of cash. Is it time to spend it yet?
It is. And the Biden team, they were very careful not to spend a lot during the primary because they obviously didn't have to contest much. They have begun spending. They have been spending on advertisements. We're going to probably see Trump, see if he comes out with some advertising spending as well. They've also been spending, importantly, on the ground game. They have hired about 1,000 people to do ground operations in some of the key swing states. So, we talk a lot about the top line number and the fact that Trump did outraise Biden in the last 2 months. But in terms of overall cash on hand and in terms of the spending plan, the Biden team feels like they're in a very good place with historic numbers coming in and a spending plan that they think is going to yield results. And by the way, we can't forget it has, to a certain extent, we have seen some really mild positive movement for the Biden team in the polls. So that is a good sign for them.
And you are talking about doing grassroots and fundraising. Let's talk a little bit about what happens after the debate. You've got now, previous to the debate, you've got Donald Trump. He is going to be going to Virginia. Then you have President Biden going to New Jersey. I mean, these are places you wouldn't necessarily think about them going now. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, look, again, we've been talking about how many people are really paying attention to the political process in the middle of the summer. And I remember in the McCain campaign in 2008, we did a Forgotten Cities tour, right? I mean, and they were forgotten cities, right? When we went there, we were forgotten. And so it's just killing time. I mean, so at the end of the day, I really don't think there's a mistake. I would say it is interesting that this issue that Jeanne presented, which is Biden's on the air trying to convince people to like him more and dislike Trump, but Trump's on the ground trying to convince his voters how important it is to vote because his voters are much less likely to turn out to vote. And so these campaigns are pursuing their self-interest in a way that is very clear. They have different strategies in this election. And if Donald Trump doesn't have those bodies on the ground to turn out his votes, they're not going to show up because they are low propensity voters. And this is the difference between a Biden supporter and a Trump supporter.
We could never forget you, Rick Davis, just for the record. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, they are our closers, our signature political panel. Thank you so much for being with us as we round out this week on this Friday. Clearly, Julie, we have a lot heading for us next week. Number of Supreme Court decisions, 14 in fact, and that presidential debate. So we'll have full coverage of it for you on this program. There'll also be coverage in the Washington Edition newsletter, on the terminal, and online. Enjoy the weekend, everyone. Stay cool. It's hot out there. And we'll see you back on Monday. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.